Hola, buen día. Hola, hola, buen día. ¿Cómo están todas, todos, todes?
Good morning.
Vamos a iniciar el día de hoy.
How are
Primero que
you?
nada,
We're going to start
pues
today.
sí,
And
con
first
un
of all,
aviso muy
we
importante
have a very
que es el
important
aviso de
announcement,
Protección
which is
Civil de acá de la coalición, a quienes agradecemos que nos hayan
citizens
prestado el espacio.
protection
Paso a
announcements
leer el
from
aviso que
this
nos da la comisión de
place.
aquí de la Ciudad de México.
And this is
Cubrebocas
the
obligatorio.
announcement
Bienvenidas todas, todos y todes.
by
Antes de
the
iniciar, daremos unos
Commission.
avisos de información general.
Wear a mask
El uso de cubrebocas
mandatorily.
es obligatorio en este espacio.
Wearing a
Ya
mask
estoy
is
escuchando cómo
mandatory.
abren el
I
cubrebocas,
am
maravilloso.
listening to how
Debido
you
a que las salas se
wear
encuentran en
it,
su máximo
and this is
aforo y
because
se
we
trata
have
de un
the
lugar cerrado.
highest number of
Pedimos
attendees,
su apoyo para
and
cumplir
we
con
are
esta
at an
disposición preventiva.
indoors place,
En
and
caso
we
de
ask for
alerta o
your
sismo
support.
o tener que
In case of
desalojar por
an
emergencia,
earthquake, and
les
if we need
solicitamos
to
guardar la calma y
empty the
atender las
place,
indicaciones del
we
personal de
ask you to
Protección
please
Civil de
pay
esta
attention
comisión
to the
para
crew
salir
members so that we can
ordenadamente por las puertas de
orderly
los
leave this
costados de las
place
salas.
using the
Les
side
agradecemos no
doors.
ingresar con
We
bebidas y
ask
alimentos
you
a este espacio.
to
También
do
les
not
recordamos que
bring
todas nuestras instalaciones,
beverages or
incluidos los jardines, son
water,
espacio 100%
and
libre de humo.
all
Estaremos en
spaces
una
at
transmisión
this
en vivo vía
venue
redes
are
sociales, por lo que les
smoke-free.
pedimos
We're
evitar
gonna have
atravesarse frente a las cámaras y silenciar
social
sus teléfonos
media
para prevenir que no haya interrupciones. Muchas
airing,
gracias y
and we will
paso la
have no
palabra a Valentina
interruptions. I will
Sendejas,
now give the
representante
floor over
país
to
de
Valentina
México, de Avina
Sendejas
en México.
from Avina,
Hola,
Mexico. She represents Mexico.
buenos días, colegas.
Good morning,
Qué gusto estar aquí esta
colleagues. It
mañana.
is
Muchas
a
gracias por haber
pleasure
hecho el
to be
espacio en
here
sus
with
agendas
you
para
this
venir.
morning. Thank you very much
Antes de
for
empezar, quiero
making
agradecer muy
this
especialmente a la
space to
Comisión de
attend
Derechos
this
Humanos por hospedarnos, por
meeting,
alojarnos
and
en este
thanks
espacio, por
to
su
this venue
hospitalidad.
for
Y
its
por supuesto que a las
hospitality. And of
instituciones
course, we
aliadas,
also thank
convocantes, sin
all
las
the
cuales este foro no habría sido
allies
posible.
that invite us
Quiero
to
agradecer mucho a
attend
la
this
Organización
forum.
Internacional de
I
las
would like to
Migraciones,
also thank the
a
International
Polaris,
Migration
al
Organization of
Institute for Human Rights
International
and Business,
Migration, Polaris,
junto
the
con ellos hemos
Institute for
ido
Human Rights and
construyendo este
Business.
espacio que ya es el
Together
segundo. El
with them,
primero,
we've been working
este
in
fue un
this
encuentro similar a
meeting.
este, con una
We
temática
already
similar a este,
had the
realizamos el
first
año pasado.
meeting similar to this one. We
La
had it
Fundación
a year
Avina y
ago
para las
for
instituciones
Avina
convocantes.
Foundation and for all the
Este es un espacio
inviting
fundamental porque
institutions.
creemos que
This
los
is a
retos que
very
presenta
important space because we believe that the
el sector
challenges
agrícola en
the
México
agricultural sector
solamente pueden
face in
abordarse de
Mexico
manera
can only be
colectiva,
addressed
¿no?
as a
Pensando en
whole,
conjunto,
always
compartiendo
thinking
experiencias
jointly, sharing
para
experiences,
poder ir
so
avanzando
that
hacia
we
superar
can
los
make
grandes
some
retos que
progress, so that
aún
we can
se presentan.
overcome the big challenges
Como
that we
sabemos,
still see.
el sector
As we
agrícola
know, the
es un sector
agricultural
fundamental
sector
en
is a
México, es
very
fundamental
important
para la,
sector in
para la
Mexico. It is
productividad,
very
para la
important for
economía, pero también para el
productivity,
sostenimiento
for
de la vida.
economy, as well as for
Sabemos que en
life. And we
México hay
know that
más de
in Mexico
16
there are more
millones
than
de
16
personas
million people
trabajadoras
who work.
agrícolas migrantes
Migrants are
y que
agricultural
en
migrants,
la mayor parte de
and
las veces
most of
viven
the
en condiciones
times they
laborales
live
sumamente
in
precarias
very
y con
poor
grandes
living
violaciones a sus
conditions and
derechos
with terrible
humanos.
infringement
Las
of their human
organizaciones que
rights.
estamos aquí, Polaris, las organizaciones que forman parte del Periplo, han
Polaris
documentado a
and
través de los
Periplo
años
have documented
muchas situaciones
many,
de
many
violaciones que
situations
van
of
desde retenciones de pago,
violations that
solicitudes de cuotas
include
indebidas,
asking for
trabajo
illegal fees,
forzoso,
retention of
y
their
para las mujeres
remuneration, and
condiciones
forced labor.
particulares, por ejemplo,
And in the
acoso,
case of women,
hostigamiento
they
sexual.
face
Para las
sexual
personas
harassment.
hablantes de lenguas
And for those
indígenas,
who speak
retos
indigenous
particulares como que los
languages,
contratos están en
specific
español y no en sus
challenges,
lenguas
contracts
originales.
written in Spanish instead
Todo
of
esto
writing
presenta
them in their
grandes
native languages. All
obstáculos y
this is a
violaciones a
big
los derechos
hindrance and
laborales
violation
de
of
todo el
labor
sector que
rights
se
of the
emplea
whole sector.
en el trabajo agrícola.
Working in the agricultural sector.
En esta mañana vamos
This
a estar
morning,
compartiendo
we're
a
going to
través de
be
tres mesas. Mi
sharing in
colega
three different
Vero
sessions,
nos
in three
contará cómo va a ser la
different
dinámica,
sessions or
pero
tables.
van a ser tres
Beto
mesas
is
donde
going to tell
podemos
us how
abordar
we're
tres
going to be
aspectos
working. We're
particulares de
going to
los
be
desafíos que
addressing
hemos ido
three important
identificando
aspects
y
and
creemos que a
challenges
través
that we have
del
identified,
diálogo
and
y
we
de
believe that it
la
is
compartir de
through
experiencias
dialogue
podemos
and through sharing of
salir con
experiences
propuestas
we
concretas que
will be
puedan
able to
avanzar
make specific
hacia
proposals so
condiciones de
that we
trabajo
can
decentes y
make
dignas.
progress, so that we can have
Para
decent
Fundación Avina
working
es
conditions
muy
with
importante, como
dignity.
decía,
For
estos
Avina
encuentros de
Foundation,
diálogo.
this type of conversation
Agradecemos
space
mucho su
is very
presencia
important. We
y
thank you all
confiamos
for
en que vamos a
attending.
poder salir de aquí
We
con
believe
algunas ideas, algunas
after this
líneas de
meeting, we're
acción
going to have
claras
a
que nos
clear
puedan ayudar a
action
seguir avanzando
items and
en esta
lines that
agenda.
would allow us to
Entonces les
make
deseo que
progress
sea una
with our
mañana muy
agenda.
productiva, que podamos
I hope
compartir y
we're going to
construir
have
en
a very
colectivo.
productive morning so that we
Y
can
le
work
paso la
together
palabra
and build
a mi colega
together.
Vero
And now I will give
para
the floor
seguir con
over
más
to my
detalles.
friend, my colleague Vero,
Gracias y
so that we
bienvenidos
can
y
continue
bienvenidas
with
a
more
todos y
specific
todas.
information. Thank you all and welcome.
Gracias, Valentina,
Thanks,
por la
Valentina, for
bienvenida.
this
Para
welcome
todo el
remarks.
efecto del
There is
aviso de
something
protección
else
civil,
about
quienes estamos sentados de
protection.
este lado,
Those who are sitting on this side of the room, in case of an emergency, we need to exit through this back door that is behind us. And I also would like to thank people from protection, those who are in this building. Would you please raise your hands so that we can know who you are in case of a question? They will be helping us. And in order to continue, we also would like to tell you how happy we are to see how interesting this conversation is. We're going to be sitting here with more than 40 working people, institutions, and work sites. And we do work. We work on the key aspects, which is a topic we're going to be addressing today. And the reason for we have to make this effort, we know there are people coming from Sinaloa, from Jalisco. Beautiful. Would you please raise your hand, Sinaloa? Where do we have people from Sinaloa, people from Jalisco? Good. And if we have people coming from other places, would you please raise your hands? Baja California, what else? San Luis Potosí, Guanajuato, Oaxaca, Guerrero, Morelos. It's wonderful how to have this space where we are all working in order to promote work jobs with dignity in the agricultural sector. And the reason why the organizers are organizing this is because at the beginning of 2024 we want to have analysis and strategies, and we want to be able to present useful information. We want to listen to the works of other government institutions, and in these spaces, in between the different sessions, we should be able to do networking. We're going to be able to go beyond in this sector. The methodology we are planning to have is three pillars, and this is what Valentina said. The very first one is the one you see here. Those who are going to trigger the main message are here with us, and in each session, we're going to have short, very specific contributions about elements that will trigger key ideas so that we can go beyond this analysis and this reflection, so that after this comments, the moderator is going to be able to open the space to these 40 institutions which are present today here. We all have a very important voice. We have many things to contribute with. We're going to recover also in our rapporteur effort what we are going to be producing in this space. And after the very first dialogue, we're going to have a break. In that break, we're going to change the members of the table of honor to address the second most important topic. And we know that in order to have an agricultural job with dignity, we need to address many different topics. So in this space, we're going to be speaking about three topics, each one of them in each one of the work sessions. But we can go beyond and have many more fora. But at this point in time, we're going to be speaking about these three topics, and this is the dynamic we were planning, because we want you to know that all your voices are very important for all of us, and we want to promote this dialogue, this participation. We want you to feel safe and at ease, and you should also know that it is being aired in Spanish, in Periplo, social media, in English, using the Polaris. And I also would like to thank interpreters who allow us big sector of the population, those who are interested on these topics, will be able to have this information. Now I will give the floor over so that we can start today's session. I will give the floor over to Laura Stecan, Chair, Coordinator of the Labor Migration Unit and Human Development from the OIM, International Migration Organization, which is the starring moderator for this very first session, which is recruitment, ethical practices, trafficking in persons prevention, and in the agricultural sector. Thank you very much. Thanks, Veronica, and thanks to all those who are with us today in this very important dialogue. As others have said, in our case, it is very important to be able to listen to you and to be in this space so that we can contribute with good practices, with participation, so that we can reach agreements. And as Veronica said, we want to go beyond what we have already said, and specifically in this very important topic, which in Mexico has to do with the agricultural agricultural sector and recruitment. Many things we're going to be addressing today in this very first session. So, if I may, I would like to introduce the panel of experts because, as you can clearly tell, it is only women, where we will be first introducing Janet Leon from the International Labor Organization, Gisela Martinez. She is in charge of verification from the Research, Training and Recruitment Center for Organized Workers. Its name is Cierto. Welcome. Thanks a lot. And Jare Garcia from the National Democratic Independent Union of Agricultural Workers. Welcome. Georgina Vázquez de los Reyes, Everite representative. Good morning. And Luz Maria Chombo from My Forest. So, as you can tell, it is a panel full of people and institutions and representatives from different organizations. So I believe it is going to be a very important panel. Before we start, each panelist will have from 8 to 10 minutes in order to make a presentation, and I will be able to tell you what will be the questions. I will be telling you which are the triggering questions. For our panelists, we have asked what is the role of the ethical recruitment to make sure there is a job offered with dignity. Which are the components, how to identify and prevent possible fraud, trafficking in persons, and forced labor in the agricultural sector, which are the characteristics of the agricultural sector will jeopardize workers when their rights are vulnerable. And as we have already said, numbers are there. You already have the information so that you can know a little bit more about the situation that we are currently facing in the agricultural sector. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Janet Leon from OIT, Labor International Organization. Thanks a lot. Today is a very important day because here we have several institutions and organizations and embassies and other players which are necessary so that we can speak about all these topics so that we can take actions in order to fight trafficking in persons, child labor. And at the OIT, we're very happy to participate. My name is Janet Leon, and I am the officer for child labor. I'm received greetings from my director and the coordinator, Mr. Benavides, who is the coordinator of this project called Acciona. We've seen the triggering questions, and we would like to tell you what happens with children. Children in agriculture. This is a very important topic for this table, for this session, because teenagers and youth and children are a priority group to be protected, because they are some of the most vulnerable groups when we speak about the worst types of forced labor, child labor, as well as trafficking in persons. And I also would like to make a short introduction of what is the Accionare project where we participate. US DOL and the International Labor Organization do an effort that wants to strengthen interinstitutional coordination of Mexican institutions so that we can fight forced labor, trafficking in persons, as well as child and labor. This project is currently taking place in Yucatan, Quintana Roo, and in the state of Chiapas. And we also have a collaboration in order to share our experiences with Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And I would like to start with our presentation of today. And the most important topic is child labor in agriculture. I will start with some words by Albert Thomas, who was the first director of the international organization. He said, child exploitation is the most non-verbal evil for human heart. Serious jobs should always protect children. Speaking about children, child labor in agriculture, we know it is inadequate, an inadequate activity for children who do not live a childhood with dignity. So when we speak about agriculture, we are taking into consideration that there are some hazardous activities for children and for teenagers. And when we speak about agriculture, we can think that there are different subsectors. And in these subsectors, there are also many risks. For example, when a child is working in a boat doing fishing activities, when they are picking planting plants, and we have also seen that many children and teenagers, if we see the shape of their hands, they are used to pick cotton. And there are many more risks they are exposed to. So where is there a risk? In most, it is in every subsector of agriculture there is a risk. We have also seen that one of the biggest risks is in health. The impact of agriculture on children and in teenagers is their health. And in many cases, children and teenagers who work for agriculture do not use a safe equipment to perform this work, and initially they shouldn't be there. The international efforts to eradicate child labor in agriculture, this is an effort that has been made for many years, but child labor is a reality in our world. At the international organization, there is a legal protection framework. One of our main agreements is 182 that it speaks about the worst types of child labor. This agreement is specifically underscores in Chapter 3 that child labor also implies forced work that affects health, security, and morality of child and of teenagers. We also have another agreement, which is 138 about the minimum age, and this agreement makes states make a commitment so that mechanisms are created so that teenagers who are legally allowed to work to take them to safe places only. And this is a commitment for the states because they need to have security standards when speaking about youth working in the agricultural sector. And another agreement, very important, is the one that has to do with health in agriculture. This one speaks about how important it is to protect children and youth in the agricultural sector, and it also highlights that teenagers should not be in these sectors, and they should, and if they are under 18 years of age. Now, after this standard, after this framework of standards, and now that states have to improve conditions so that teenagers can be child labor free, we have a lot to do. Today, we are facing a world where the rural zones have more or less 122 million children facing this child labor. In the case of Latin America, we're speaking about 10.5 million doing dangerous activities, and which is the National Survey of Child Labor in Mexico, said that in Mexico there are 3.7 million children and teenagers performing child labor, and there are 600,000 boys and male young people in the agricultural sector, and there are 105,000 teenagers in agriculture. So 700,000 children, girls, boys, and teenagers, or teens, yes, in the Mexican agriculture. Now that we saw these statistics, and then based on all the agreements ratified by Mexico on this regard, we should want to also say there are risks. We have a long way to go, but some of the risks where children are exposed to is to lose their lives. They don't want to be harmed. They don't want to get intoxicated by medicines. They don't want to have respiratory diseases, among others, and this is due to several factors such as high temperatures in agriculture, the use of machines, very heavy machines, and the use of very sharp weapons that could also affect children and others. So we see that in general terms we can also speak about the gender perspective, and we saw there are muscle and bone injuries that affect teenager women and women, and this is because they need to carry heavy sacks full of fruit and vegetables, and they have to walk long distances, and this is why a child and a teenager is going to think this is there are more spaces. Something important is that they also run the risk of suffering from rape and sexual abuse. And something important is that in the agricultural sector, it is a sector where there is low surveillance, and this is why children who are in agriculture they can suffer this type of sexual assault and violence. And when we speak about migrating children, we see that they are exposed to different risks. One of them is discrimination because they come from a different place. There's also isolation for being afraid in a place different to people who do not know, to suffer violence because of the migration context when parents are taking them to very poor conditions, and when they are threatened to perform forced labor, and they are being threatened, and they can be reported to the migration before the migration authority. Another point that I would like to say is that teenagers who can legally work, they also are exposed to risks in agriculture. This is because they will be facing unstable jobs, physical and emotional development problems, low level of education, low level of training, and cross vulnerabilities. And what do we want to do and what can be said? We have already spoken about the problems, the overview, the statistics, and the agreements. And now what comes next? And here we have activities and actions, preventive actions proposed to apply the rules and protocols in forced labor and child labor, to intervene in order to make sure children do not perform dangerous agricultural activities, to promote the strategies and programs to improve life conditions in rural zones, to integrate aspects relative to child labor right at the center of the migration policies, to offer education in rural places, to make the private sector sensitive to how important this is, and security and protection when working and being near to those young people who can legally work. Other important activities are to improve inspection, speaking about child labor in order to comply with the legislation in agricultural places. And employers, in the case of teenagers who can legally work, they have the duty to keep venues, tools, all the equipment in good conditions. Employers should safeguard young people so that they have enough training in order to do safe activities. Employers should not allow people under 18 years of age to perform dangerous activities. And last but not least, I would like to speak about the final thoughts. And I would like to highlight 4 points that we have already mentioned. First, a conversation about the jobs with dignity in the agricultural place. It implies safeguarding and enforcing the rights. And two, if there is a risk for the physical or moral security of children, uh, should not be allowed. Thirdly, there are very thin lines between forced labor, child labor, and trafficking in persons. In no sector, children will be exposed to this type of problem. Fourth, all people have to make a contribution so that there are no children or teenagers being exposed to child labor in agriculture. This would be it. And my name, remember, is Janet Leon, National Officer of Child Work on behalf of the International Migration Organization. I thank you and I can be attentive to your questions. Thank you very much. Thanks, Janet, for this explanation and specifically for this very important information and for underscoring which are the risks. And there are some children and teenagers who haven't been identified in the sector here in Mexico. Now we are going to give the floor over to Gisela Martinez from Desierto. Hello, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. I am Gisela Martinez and I am in charge of the verification department in Cierto, Mexico. It is a research and training and recruitment center in the case of organized workers. In Cierto, Mexico, we are basically a non-profitable organization which main mission is to perform recruitment, is to do recruitment where we are going to be working for agricultural professional workers committed to their communities and to their companies. And this is to have a new recruitment process. Sometimes when we speak about recruiting with ethics, we wonder what is the meaning of this. In Mexico, it is also important to say that Cierto is registered as a non-profitable job placement agency, and we also work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with the job institution. What do? We identify and we train and we place workers. We bring them to ranches in Mexico as well as in the United States. We're going to be starting a project in Guatemala so that they can come to work and then move to the United States. And we also have another process to recruit workers in Mexico. And this work will happen on a temporal basis and always with an H-2A visa. And the work is going to be performed with transparency, honesty, and to have no additional commissions. And people always say it sounds beautiful, but how does it work in practice? Well, we have developed a mechanism where first we collaborate and we work with the verifying entities. These organizations and associations, independent institutions, and social and religious groups who work at the community level, and they are at least located in those communities. It is through them how we can identify workers, female workers, and we want them to know the place where they are working so that they can closely make sure there are no other people being the victims of fraud. And this verification process is implemented through the application of three questionnaires, and these are the questionnaires that will happen during the recruitment process and the contract of workers. And in the very first stage, we ask about the training process, if standards have been complied with, to identify expenses. For example, if they had to pay for the visa, or if they have had to pay for their transport to the United States. And in the second questionnaire, we make sure the contract or agreement conditions are the ones actually offered since the beginning, that how many hours they need to work and where the ranches that we originally offered them, and since the beginning of the contract, and to also to have a good remuneration. And thirdly is to corroborate all the previous steps and to make sure how is it that workers have been able to have an improvement, to make an improvement in their daily lives through this migration, how thanks to this temporal work they have performed. I do not know. I am always very happy when workers tell me that they want to express their gratitude for having a house, their own business, because workers they do not see the agricultural job as a way of living. Some of them see this as a place, as a moment to build a little bit more. So I believe this process is important, because it is pretty disappointing when you are only told stories, people being deceived. I am still paying for a doubt because I do not know how many, and it was a lender of money. Despite of my work and my effort, I was not able to pay for my debt. So this is part of the good things that we want to include in our questionnaires. We don't want this to happen, and we don't want more victims to be victims of fraud. And for these questionnaires, when these questionnaires are replied, there are some key questions where we call them alerts. If they have questions, for example, if you ask them, did you pay to move to go to the States, and they tell you no, and then if you ask where you were given a refund, and they say yes, well, it means there was a payment. So we need to investigate those payments, and this is where we have the verifying parts. They are independent, they do not belong to the cierto, but they speak to the workers, and sometimes they say they were not given a payment because there were no expenses, so nothing was owed to the workers. So this is another type of case. It is another type of alert that is not an alert in some cases. And the trust, the confidence that all these counterparts develop, and this is why it is very important to see them in their own communities, in our own communities, because sometimes, apart from the alerts we identify, sometimes they directly workers call the counterparts, and they say, this is happening to me. There is a situation we didn't want to speak about it, because sometimes there is retaliation, and we know it happens. This is something we need to work in ethics. We want them not to make it and to see this as an additional burden, and to build trust. And how are we going to empower them so that they understand it is not it is not a gift. It is not that they are given an opportunity. They need to do something. And some of the reasons why we work in this field of ethics, I would like to underscore uh, the aim, which is to be able to prove, yes, it is possible to have recruitment with ethics, it is possible to have this process, and workers should not be paying. They should have no expenses, and it is something feasible for both workers and for the agency. And among other things, we also have the fact that it is possible to comply with these codes of ethics, the certainty of recruitment, and the certainty for workers. And the same happens in the case of ranchers. When they know they're going to be workers, they need to be committed, and they need to know they will not be paying or collecting debts. This will bring a positive impact to productivity. And we also have the permanence of people when they come to a place with where there are conditions with dignity. This is something asking in the questionnaire, the food transport that takes them to their home, to their job sites. This is the reason why they can become permanent workers. So what we want to do is to make it a win-win situation for all of them. The next one, please. And I also would like to say that obviously this is a process that it will always be an ongoing improvement. Questionnaires, for example, we updated this and we have included different topics such as the identification of teenager labor and child labor in ranches. And it's been a part of this process where we have also seen that we can get involved and work with more organizations and to produce this process. And the next one, please. Well, these are some of the publications we have supported, and this is something we have coordinated. We're also working, we have the protocol of ethics. So, considering the indigenous people, this is another zone of risk. Language, this is another very important topic. We've been working on this. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Gisela, for your participation. And something very, very important is the work of the recruiters in Mexico. Clearly, this process and the lack of information of the population, domestic or international, is very little information. And something important we need to underscore is fraud. As you know, and maybe you have seen this in the news, there are millionaire frauds that are produced by all these agencies that recruit people. They charge, but at the end of the day, we're speaking about millionaire frauds. And we need to know, people need to know which are the official sources of information. This is why it is very important to speak about fraud, and we could also see TIP, so the work that recruiting agencies do with government, with the private sector, with organizations as we have done, specifically international, the United Nations. So this is something very, very important so that people do not face this type of situation. Now we will continue with the next presentation, and now I will give the floor over to Jere Garcia from the National Independent Union for Agricultural Workers. Hello, my name is Leonides Jire Garcia Ramirez, and I represent Mrs. Belina Ramirez Ruiz. She is the General Secretary of the National Democratic Independent Union of Agricultural Workers. Today, I will be speaking about the experience as an agricultural worker in the Valle de Salquintin, the Valley, to support the union. organization. San Quintin, it is a valley, it is a very productive valley, and it is the main producer of berries, and it is also the main producer of vegetables. More or less 60 domestic and international companies and small ranches all doing agriculture. And here we do in the very first place agricultural activities, agricultural jobs. And this is what we find in San Quintin. The National Independent Union is the result of the fight of many workers who were wanted to have their labor dignity and their rights protected. And this union was created to defend human rights of workers because those rights are violated every day. And this one composed by agricultural workers. Here, all the workers are involved. They are involved in the movement and the organization when there are people who want to protect the integrity of the workers, to promote the defense and the enforcement of rights which are established in the law. In San Quintin, I would like to tell you that despite of the efforts and fights already made in order to fight and to eradicate violence against rights of workers, it's been difficult to work with workers because they didn't want to lose their sources of income. In San Quintin, it's been said, it's been seen that there is informal agricultural activities, informal, and this is why there is even more vulnerability of young workers and children in San Quintin, and we also have insecurity. We see insecurity in the different places of Mexico, and the place where they want to go is San Quintin in Baja California. And today, only a few companies will bring workers in a safe way with promised salaries which are not always honored. In San Quintin, and we also see forced labor because since this is a border state, workers have the dream and they want to go to work to the United States legally, hired by some of the companies which are settled in San Quintin, and this is strategy they use as a threat or as a forced labor. They want to be able to go all the way to the States, but they will never go to the United States. And this is what we've seen in San Quintin. And in the case of H-2A visa, it's been said that it is very difficult. It is very difficult, and sometimes there is fraud in the community or in nearby communities, such as the city of Ensenada, for example, because they use the strategy of saying that they are companies and that work for the United States, but they ask for money. This is a type of insurance in order to take them to work there. It is a fraud, and there are many people from San Quintin who have spoken about these situations in the social media, but it hasn't been possible to. It hasn't been possible to do something, and these officers haven't been found. And all those who commit these frauds against vulnerable people who have the dream to go and work, the work of of this union, together with the organizations of female agricultural workers, has been integration and training on labor and human rights, health in San Quintin. And in 2022, we decided to organize 2 monthly general workshops for agricultural workers. And it is important to say that it's been very very, very difficult for workers, for agricultural workers to take the time to receive information about their rights, because most of the day they are in the agricultural sites working. The only moment they have to take a rest is when they go home, and we didn't have the expected answer. Speaking about this information and training workshops, this we're going to be given for free through Muki women together to defend female workers, which is working with a national agreement as well. We also decided, together with our organizers, we decided to visit the addresses of different people in different places, and we found insecurity and informal jobs. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you numbers specifically, but most of the workers who come from different states in the south, such as Oaxaca, Guerrero, Chiapas, and Veracruz, they go to San Quintin in order to receive a better salary, but they found insecurity, labor exploitation, and they are not given, they don't even have fringe benefits, and they do not have contracts, and they work on a daily basis. Unfortunately, with this daily rates, they do not offer health services, they do not offer transport, and they do not protect labor accidents. And this is why last year we had more or less 2 accidents of trucks who were transporting agricultural workers informally, and thanks God there were no people who died. We're only speaking about minor accidents, but together with the union, it was possible to pay for expenses of those who were more damaged. And we also work with pregnant women who have been fired because of being fired. And this is where we see discrimination in agricultural female workers. They cannot make decisions about their own bodies to have children or to have children because they are fired. And if they come from other states, they will not be taken back to the same places. Many of them were taken out of the camp, so the order of the unions is to help them find a safe place. In case they decide to look for a different place, or if they want to go to San Quintin, they can be in a safe place in San Quintin, despite of the fact that there are health services with some of the workers. We've seen labor accidents, and we've seen how companies get rid of. We've been with workers. We have seen workers who have had amputations. They do not have an eye or one of the upper or lower limbs, and the company didn't pay for compensation. And then these workers are vulnerable. And despite of all these situations, we have also discovered that competent authorities have fully supported us in order to eradicate the root cause. They are expected to inspect companies to find this lack of safe conditions and to find discrimination. And this is why the independent union took the tool that is available to everyone, which is the Facebook social media, in order to air this type of public claim in the social media. And this is why there is endorsement by the workers, and this is why the authorities, when they are exposed that they are not doing what is expected to do, they come and talk to us so that we can organize dialogue sessions in San Quintin. The Ministry of Labor in Baja California. A year ago, we had more or less two meetings, but we were not able to follow it up, and we wanted to follow up some cases of violence in San Quintin. And something that I forgot to tell you is that the union, together with the Association of Women, organized the defense of a woman who was being suffering, who was exposed to sexual harassment by her boss, and competent authorities didn't pay attention to this. But with the participation of the union and with the claim, and by showing all these public videos, the company, it was the Ministry of Labor, the one that accepted to defend, to support, and to defend this woman who was sexually abused in an agricultural place. So we are following this up because unfortunately these cases take a very long time, and sometimes workers who cannot make an agreement before a claim, they have to wait many, many months in order to succeed. Or if not, they can simply lose the case. So this is the role of the union in the last 2 years, where we have reinforced the work team. Today we have more or less 20 people in the organization and the union. There are 6 secretaries and others are people helping. They are organizers, and they all make the commitment to keep fighting to defend workers in Valle de San Quintin. Today we also have an office in the state of Jalisco, a representation, but because of the health issues of Mrs. Verina, we haven't been able to follow up the cases of Jalisco, and this is where there are 300 workers, agricultural workers, who were in Jalisco, and some of them were fired with no justification. And the secretary, who is Adolfo Tejeda in Jalisco, he was leading this movement in Jalisco through strikes, and strikes were organized. And it is important to say that there's people who were fired with no justification. They have improved the situation. We are working in each one of the cases, and we work with those people who approach us to file a complaint, or if they have questions and answers. This year we are proposing more or less 4 monthly workshops in different neighborhoods in San Quintin in order to bring information to communities instead of waiting for them to come and ask for information. And the work of women and those who are part of the association, they made a commitment to participate in this training. And I am the one leading this project. Thank you very much. Thanks, Judith, for this very valuable information. And I would like to highlight 2 important points mentioned by Judith. On the one hand, we have all these needs of women, of migrant agricultural workers, specifically speaking about the needs they have. They need to work, and this type of discrimination they are subject to, and specifically violence. It is not only trafficking in persons or forced work, but we also have the sexual aspect. We need to pay attention to the verification topic, and here the authorities should be responsible for doing all this. And then another point I would like to highlight is access to labor justice. This is very important, not only the information, but also where and how people can complain about the specific situations. And something important is also times that will take you to this type of reconciliation. And if there is no reconciliation, to be able to then take a place. We need to resolve those situations before those are taken to class, into trial. Now we're going to give the floor over to our next panelist, and I will give the floor over to Georgina Vázquez from Verite. Yes. Thank you so much, Laura, and good morning. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, but what I did was to answer the triggering questions that we have in the agenda, and I will be very fast. I have 4 full pages, but I know that I have to stick to the time. The very first question is, what is the role in ethical recruitment in order to have jobs with dignity? And I would like to underscore 2 premises. The very first one has to do with the following: if there is a debt in the labor relationship, one of the premises is that when workers do not pay for their recruitment, it is the employer who pay for all the recruitment costs. There is less risk of debt, and there is more possibility for workers to voluntarily leave a job if it is not what they are expecting. So this is something we have answered. We want to have more light about this specific point in time, because there is an accumulation, or rather origination of debt whenever saw this as a starting point. And so this is the very first starting point, responsible behavior. And the second is that one of the reasons why it is women people the ones charge for these hiring conditions is this is because employers do not pay for this, despite of the fact that this is a cost related to the employee. It is something to be paid by employers, by companies, and to be estimated in the production cost. And when workers are given this information, the premise and the responsible recruitment companies, they are still transferring this production cost to workers. In other words, are the workers subsidizing when the cost then is transferred through the different agents and labor agents? These are very high amounts, by the way. These are very high amounts, and they can be legal because they are somehow related to jobs, but it is something illegal because. So here again, the starting point, and speaking about responsible training, is that working people, when they have a debt, it is going to be more difficult for them to leave their jobs voluntarily. If you eliminate the debt, then there is more possibility to leave your job voluntarily. So I would like to highlight this, those who are like these are less vulnerable to exploitation and to different types of labor exploitation if there is no debt. And the elimination of the debt is one of the results, but vulnerability is less as well when there are different types of risks at the job site: harassment, gender violence, and this is because many times this is related to this threat. From this perspective, many of the recruitment strategies today globally are focused on making sure it is going to be companies and employers the ones paying for this cost. And now, if we see responsible recruitment, and if we start to see the different approaches such as the due diligence, what we want to do is to make sure if there is a policy payment by the owner. We need to make this happen, and we need to make it to see it. And if companies pay for this, this is when we will make sure vulnerabilities of workers will be less at the job sites. This is something that I wanted to say because it takes me to another point that has to do with the components of ethical recruitment. And Verité,
Los principios generales y directrices de contratación equitativa de la
general
organización.
principles and fair practices of the International Labor Organization. How have we organized all this in the due diligence approach? And the very first component I would like to underscore is that workers do not pay for hiring fees, not even in advance, never as a deduction of their salary. And what is even more important is that when we speak about no payment, it should also, we have to remember that it is the employers the ones paying for this, because today it is very easy to find in different behavioral codes and guidelines. And speaking about the policies of companies with respect to employees, we need to have something about these policies. And here, workers do not pay, but those who have to pay should be this. They should be the one working with this. Another component is precisely the principle of that says the employer pays. And one of you brought this business card, and it is precisely this: employers will need to pay for all these expenses, and it is very important to introduce it at the level of policies. But today, due diligence is telling us how can we make sure it is not only introduced as a policy. There should be mechanisms to make sure employers are paying for all these costs. And the third component that I believe is the one that we've seen more in the responsible recruitment practice implemented in Mexico, it has to do with the information given by employers, recruiters, and service providers. Information given during the recruitment process. In other words, service renderers should act legally and transparently, and it means that they are forced to inform
de forma transparente, de forma precisa y en un lenguaje que sea comprensible para la
all information in an understandable language. And another component is that there should be no discrimination criteria against working people, and all these people should receive precise information about working conditions. Workers, male and female workers, this is something very important. This is a clarification about responsible. They have access to the complete employment or job cycle, and whatever happens in recruitment will never be separated from what can from the things that can happen to them. And here I am speaking about refund of fees, and this is also something very common we currently see in recruitment processes. It's not a prevention practice. I've seen many policies, and I have seen many contracting processes that say they are responsible recruitment, but what they do is to use the refund, and this is to pay for expenses of workers. But the reality is that refund is within the remediation measures, because we have to always know that in case there is a person who is working, and if that person needed to make the payment. We know for sure there was a debt, and as I already told you, since many of these are a very high cost, we are not even speaking about a legal cost that will be paid by workers. And employers normally pay for the legal, a refund is a very important component and part of the remediation. It is part of ethics. And I also would like to say things which are not responsible recruitment, because there are many responsible recruitment initiatives which are presented as responsible, but there are components that oppose this. And here we're speaking about there are things which are only a remediation mechanism to accept the presence of debt. It is the opposite to what is expected. And I've seen documents that are there in the agricultural sector. And now you can see responsible recruitment. And then there is an example of a note, a promissory note, and the promissory note also tells you there is a part in blank so that the employer tells the worker how many interests are going to be attained, and this is one way to make sure we'll have the possibility to keep working. And each time there is this type of content, it would be lovely to have an alert, to have only the payment, then no payment of fees by the worker. But it has to be paid by the employer. And if it is not the employer, then someone else is going to have to pay for this. And initiatives which are exclusively focused on in general working conditions. If there is a recruitment fair process, it has to allow for workers, it would allow workers to have access to a better job and a process that will not reduce vulnerabilities. So it cannot be considered a responsible recruitment process. And last but not least, how to identify possible frauds and trafficking in persons. And here I would like to highlight one approach by Verite, which is the use of indicators of forced labor published by the International Labor Organization. In this exercise, it is possible to see the different risks in the different stages of the cycle, but this is all related to recruitment. And this information is divided into several classifications and how they are used in different points in time in recruitment, living conditions, and jobs, and the possibility of leaving voluntarily a job. And these indicators are very useful when doing the identification of vulnerabilities in this process. And just to give you some examples. There are some indicators of forced labor, but during recruitment, which is lack of information about labor conditions. It is not possible to say that someone accepted the job if the person doesn't know exactly what they are expected to do. And an example of a threat indicator can be retention of personal documents, and this is the usefulness of these indicators about forced labor to identify not only the risks in recruitment and debt, but also to be able to identify risks of trafficking in persons and other exploitation risks. And I do not have time to emphasize the characteristics of the agricultural sector that will jeopardize our workers. But I only would like to close by speaking about prevention in due diligence. Due diligence, I'm sure we have listened more about mechanisms for due diligence, something that is being implemented and companies have to. I hear all the ones involved in the hiring process, or they need, this is to make sure workers will have access to a job with dignity and to be able to leave those jobs in on a voluntary basis. If it is, I mean, if as long as I can do it, it is good. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for your participation, for efficiently use the time and to try to answer all the questions. What you said is very, very important and something very relevant is to highlight the role of employers when speaking about recruitment costs and something that is related to what Jire said about all this. What is the burden given to the worker when in fact costs should be paid by employers? And we should also be very, very clear on what has to do about contracts and what to do before starting to work, to make to be very clear with respect to the working conditions and which are the responsibilities of employers as well. Last but not least, we're gonna finish this very first dialogue with the participation of Luz Maria Chamba from IFORES. You have 10 minutes and please go ahead. Thanks for this invitation. For those who haven't heard about IFORES, IFORES is an organization of agricultural entrepreneurs in Mexico with 12 agricultural organizations, and then other companies joined the effort. And then in 2015, this is when this organization was created, and the idea of the creation of IFORES is to speak about standards of the best companies and to make them the standards for everyone. Attaining this is not easy. It is not easy because the agricultural sector, because there are many specificities to the agricultural sector. I will not tell you things that have to do with production or uncertainty, prices, markets, and I will specifically speak about what has to do with this session. The agricultural sector, as technology has been included into the it was necessary to, they started to look for not local workers where the agricultural situation, where the work takes place. And this is why people from different places were brought to these local places. Technology is being used and the market is asking the producers to comply with the standards. And for example, products should be in specific places all year long. Tomatoes are not only in different places, in only one place, and they should be present everywhere. Tomatoes tomatoes are produced all year long. Companies face challenges with respect to production, and they have also faced the challenge of having enough labor in order to produce that production or that harvest or that crop. And if you remember some years ago, migration from going from southern states to up north, and those people were coming from highly marginalized places from Guerrero, Oaxaca. Michoacan at that time was one of the important sources of labor for the north. And at that time, migration was first couples, people alone, but then it was family migration, and family migration then took companies to have the need to count or to have infrastructure, and then little by little that infrastructure was included, housing, basic health, water services, daycare centers, education services for children, etc., etc. And in this process, and government, when trying to identify the conditions of those people, those were not the best conditions, and this is how strategies were established in order to look for a way jointly. Government and entrepreneurs were expected to improve living conditions and working conditions of all these people, and I believe we all know that there was a time when government established as a public policy a program to take care of countryside or agricultural workers, the agricultural workers, day workers, and with that program, they started to implement improvements. Speaking about assistance, helping, overcoming living conditions in those places where workers were coming to, and also to improve conditions in their places of origin. And with the challenges the strategy was facing, there were deficiencies, but at the end of the day, there was one journey towards improving the conditions of workers, and there was in a time then there was less participation by the government authorities, and government was not only participating in the social aspect, it was also participating in the labor aspect. There was better coordination, there was some preventive work and efforts implemented with the agricultural sector and with the Ministry of Labor as well, specifically. And this is how we were working together. We were trying to improve working conditions. We wanted to improve safety, salaries and benefits. And then there was a time when there were different challenges to be faced by the sector. On the one hand, those government supports and programs were eliminated, and first the government was doing what it was expected from them, and entrepreneurs were expected to do. They were not all doing the same, it is true, but there were some who were actually doing this. And this was generalized across the sector. And then those labor intermediaries who were participating in those linking processes of workers were leaders of communities, and they were leaders of their different family groups, and there was more commitment, there was also the benefits were to be implemented. People were trying to bring benefits to not only one person but to many people. They were labor intermediaries, and they had a different approach because then there were more needs of the workers in the agricultural industry, and in the workers, the number of workers was less and less, and there was also government participation. And this is when the hiring systems or contracting systems were changing, and it was not the leaders of the communities, the ones in charge of doing this recruitment process. We started to see other people with different profiles, and those people were participating, and they started to see this as a business, and they started to have a whole system. They started to have a whole system of people
sus derechos a esas personas, no les cubren los derechos que tienen que cubrirles porque
Not all
son
the rights are being
finalmente sus trabajadores,
enforced,
o sea, se convirtieron en empresarios
and they became
en este proceso de
entrepreneurs in
reclutamiento.
this recruitment process.
Por otro lado,
On the other
tenemos
hand,
una escasez de
we
mano de
have
obra
a lack
al
of labor
incrementarse, digamos, la
because
migración
migration
a Estados
was
Unidos, a
more
Canadá de trabajadores
going to the
agrícolas
United
y
States and to
también
Canada,
detonando las
agricultural
economías
workers,
de
and
lugares de origen por
to
parte del
improve the
gobierno
economies
federal,
in
entonces
the local
reducen la
places, and
cantidad
this
de
is
mano de
where
obra,
there
además
was
de que
less labor available, and
digamos, la demografía o los
the
grupos demográficos en
demographics
nuestro
and the
país y en
demographic
todo el
groups
mundo
in
se
our
están
country and
modificando,
across
ya no es la
and
misma
all over the
cantidad de
world,
jóvenes
all this
que
is
antes,
changing.
ahora hay más
Now
investidores.
we see more
Entonces,
older
en
people
ese
than young
sentido,
people, and this is why
empiezan a adquirir más poder, digamos, los intermediarios laborales.
intermediaries, labor
Y ahora nosotros
intermediaries
reconocemos que
were
hay una
even more
situación
powerful,
realmente muy
and now we
complicada
recognize
y que en
actually
gran
very
medida
complicated
estas
situation.
prácticas digamos, de
And
fraudes, de extorsiones,
those
de que
fraud
aún y cuando la
practices and
empresa
extortions,
cubra
and
los gastos de
even
contratación,
if the
las
company
empresas, los
pays for
intermediarios
hiring
laborales les piden a los trabajadores que
cost,
cubran ciertos gastos.
they have
Y
to
esto
pay for
nosotros
expenses.
tratamos y
And
buscamos la
this is
manera
something
de
we look for
controlarlos,
a
pero en
way.
algunas
This is
ocasiones ni
something
siquiera
we're
la
trying
empresa,
to control,
algunas
but
veces puede tener
sometimes
la información
not all
real
the
de lo que
companies have
sucede en
actual
el tránsito
information of what is
migratorio.
happening
Entonces, en ese
during the
sentido, nosotros
migration
sabemos
process, and
que el
this is
reto que
why
nos
we know that the
enfrentamos no es
challenge we are
fácil.
facing is not
Las
an easy
empresas
challenge,
ahora han
and
estado
companies
buscando cómo
today have been
fortalecer
looking
sus
for a way
estructuras
to
al interior
strengthen
para hacer
their
el reclutamiento y la
interior
contratación de los
structures in order
trabajadores
to
del
do
campo de manera
recruitment of
directa.
workers to do
Pero nos
this
enfrentamos
directly.
con las
But what
mafias,
we
no
are
solamente en
facing
los
is
lugares de
mafia,
origen,
not only in the
sino con
places
todas
of
las
origin,
mafias
but we're
en lo
also
que son
facing
los
all in
tránsitos migratorios, ¿no?
mafia during the
Entonces,
migration
sabemos
process.
que
So we
tenemos que
know
seguir
that we need to
trabajando y
keep
en ese
working,
sentido lo que
and
hemos hecho es
what we have done
capacitar
is to
por parte
train.
de FORES a los
In
equipos de
I40s,
las
we are training
empresas.
teams of
Nosotros
the different
ahora
companies,
estamos muy enfocados a que se cumplan
and we
no
want
solamente lo que viene en
to
condiciones generales en la Ley Federal del
comply
Trabajo,
with the
sino
general
también que
conditions
se
within
cumplan
the
los derechos
general
especiales que tienen
federal
los
labor
trabajadores del
law, and to
campo,
also comply with
porque
the
ahí se
specific
especifica claramente
rights
la
of
cuestión de la transportación,
agricultural
es una
workers, because here we
responsabilidad
have
de
transport.
cubrir ese gasto por parte del
The
trabajador, las comisiones
workers should
de
not be
contratación no
paying
es
for
una
this.
responsabilidad
It
de
is not
ellos,
the
lo tiene que cubrir
responsibility of them. It has to
el
be
patrón
paid
muchas
by the
veces o el empleado
employer,
lo cubre,
and
se
many
lo
times the
cubre al
employer
intermediario laboral.
is paying
Ahorita el reto es
this to
cómo
the labor
llegar a
intermediary. But
controlar
now the
la acción
challenge
del
is how
intermediario
can we
laboral. Creo
control the
que
actions by
aquí
the
un
labor
poder realmente muy
intermediaries,
grande
and they are
que
becoming very,
también
very powerful.
no, yo reconozco
And
que
I
en parte de
recognize that
responsabilidad
it is
de
also
los
the
empresarios,
responsibility of
pero
entrepreneurs. I recognize this.
digamos, a
But
medida que se vaya
if
formalizando la relación de
it is
trabajo,
possible
que se
to have a
vaya
more formal
cumpliendo
labor
con la
relationship, if
seguridad
it is
social de los
possible to comply
trabajadores,
with the
con la
health
formalización no
services of
solamente de la
workers
relación
to
de
make
los
the
de la
relationship
empresa con los trabajadores,
formal,
sino
the
también de la
relationship of
empresa
the
con
company
esos
with the workers,
intermediarios
but also the
laborales y que en un
relationship
momento
between the
determinado
company
la
and the
empresa
labor
también tenga
intermediaries.
manera
And the company should have
de
a
actuar.
way
En ese
to take
sentido, quiero
actions.
comentarles que
And
desde
on this
nuestra
regard, I
opinión
would
hay
like
un
to say that
vacío,
there is an
ya
empty
lo han
space.
comentado,
There
en la
is
actuación de
a
la
gap
autoridad
in
laboral,
the
pero
actions
también
of
hay
the
un
labor
vacío
or
en la
labor authority,
definición de la
but there is
intermediación
also a
laboral
gap in
en
this
el sector
labor
agrícola y de la
intermediation in the
intervención de
agricultural
la
sector
autoridad
and
en
the
ese sentido. En el
intervention of the
2002 surgió el
authority.
Servicio
In the year
Nacional del Empleo
2002,
en
the
el
National
Magisterio. El
Service of
Servicio
Employment
Nacional del
and the
Empleo en su
National
programa de movilidad
there was a
laboral
labor
para el sector
mobility
agrícola y uno de
sub-program
los
for the
objetivos
agricultural
de
sector.
ese
And one of the
programa desde el
objectives of that
2012 era
program,
justamente
as of the year
eliminar la participación de los
2002, the
enganchadores, que
aim was to
decían en
eliminate
los
the
documentos
participation of
de
those who were
selección del
the
empleo. Sin embargo,
ones
eso no ha sido
recruiting people.
posible,
It hasn't
no
been
se han
possible.
logrado los propósitos del Servicio
It
Nacional
has
del Empleo
the
porque al
national
final del día
the aim
ellos
of
no
the the National Labor Service hasn't been attained because they do not have enough people. And what happens at the end of the day is that the same labor intermediaries are being used, and then those labor intermediaries are related to the companies. So this is a pretty challenging situation. I know I am running out of time, but I also would like to say that now, with respect to what she said about work risks, it is not a responsibility to be paid by entrepreneurs, and the subsidies for their work risks should be included in the 100% of the wage of the worker, and it is the responsibility of Seguro Social. And if whenever there is a work risk, people should go to the Seguro Social, because Seguro Social has health services, has the mechanisms to make companies pay for the economic aspect through the capital or equity. And in relationship to pregnant women, I believe this is a very important topic, and my proposal is to touch upon this, because what happens is that if we review the federal the regulation, we're going to find in the law and in the regulation we're going to see that in fact pregnant women should never be present in agricultural activities, and this is because of the conditions that exist. They're very risky conditions that exist, and I believe this is a very interesting topic that we should be addressing later. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Luz María. Creo que con tu participación
Thanks, Luz Maria. And with your participation, we are going to be closing this session with a topic we should never forget about. Because on the one hand, when we speak about all these situations that we see in the agricultural sector, we need to know not only today's situation that we face today. You spoke about many, many different things. This is something we see, which is also the lack of labor force in the agricultural sector, the reduction of the population, young people who are planning to go to the States. Another important thing is climate change. Something we see in many places, agriculture, and of course we have government, we have the change of policies, also the change of support in the agricultural sector. This has had a very important repercussion in different aspects, and to be able to understand this, what is the role and which are the different mechanisms and institutions and agencies which are clearly part of the Seguro Social. This is a basic point that we need to take into consideration. And of course, something very, very important is to understand the migration context. It is something very, very complex. It is something that changes every day, and it is affecting many of the practices, mechanisms, and other things that were mentioned by Luz Maria. I will now open the floor to, we have 10 minutes.
Para quienes puedan hacer alguna pregunta, quienes quieran hacer también algún comentario, o incluso poder mencionar algún trabajo que estén haciendo de manera muy puntual sobre lo que acabamos de dialogar en estos temas de reclutamiento. Nada más levanten la mano para
Please raise your hand so that we can give you the microphone.
Primero y allá después. Si quieren empezamos acá y luego ya nos vamos para acá.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Sí me escuchan bien? Sí, ya se escucha bien. Mi nombre es Itandewi Salvador.
My name is Itandewi. I do monitoring learning. I would like to tell you that we are very, very interested in what has to do with ethical recruitment. Some of the deliverables, it includes the creation of an intersectorial solution that would allow the private sector to have new mechanisms to do ethical recruitment. We're very interested in this solution. And within the frame of labor rights, We appreciate your participation,
Seguramente más adelante
and surely
veremos como casos también
later we will be inviting you to a session so that we can speak about these solutions.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Un
Great,
favor,
thanks a
cuando
lot.
vayan a hablar, digan su nombre, de dónde vienen y si
Please
quiten el
introduce
tapabocas porque no
yourself
se
and
está
please do
escuchando bien,
not wear
sobre
the
todo para
mask.
la transmisión, entonces les agradecemos eso. Gracias.
Hola, muy buenos días a todos.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rodriguez and I come from Jornamex.
A nombre del doctor.
On behalf of Dr. Agustin Escobar Latapí, he sends his greetings and we appreciate the invitation.
El doctor no pudo asistir.
He was not able to be
Para
here.
nosotros era muy importante hacer presencia en este diálogo.
And it was important for us to be present. And for those who do not know Jornamex, I would like to tell you that in the last 6 years, Jornamex has been doing very stringent analysis, and we have also made recommendations for players interested in agricultural practices. We want to promote agreements to improve labor conditions in the Mexican countryside. It is important to say that this very important quality diagnosis has been used in Mexico as well as in other countries. All this information has been used by the Ministry of Labor, by entrepreneurs and the International Trade Commission, and by the organizations. You can have access to all the work and to the publications we have produced in the last 6 years in the jornamex.com website, and today we are working in the creation of comics and audiobooks in order to work to give a source of information to agricultural workers, always speaking about the labor rights of this sector. And in order to summarize what Jornamex has done, I would like to tell you that we have been able to work with the creation of very rigorous analysis, reliable ones, and now we are trying to create a technical coalition where we have the directors of companies, high Mexican government officers, representatives of unions, and people from non-governmental entities and organizations, and we have reached agreements, and we've been able to make recommendations for governments and social organizations that directly promote improvement in the compliance of the labor standards of Mexico. Our aim is to keep working with the social organizations, entrepreneurial organizations, unions, and with government so that we can achieve and enter into agreements so that we can expand the compliance of labor rights and to improve the living conditions of agricultural workers. Last December as well, I am part of the team that is doing field and research work. Last December, we were working in the state of Guanajuato. We visited Salvatierra, we also visited Romita, and we were able to talk to workers who have gone to the United States with the H-2A visa, and they share with us their experiences in the recruitment process. And I would like to emphasize how people, at least in the places where we went to, how those people have created new ways, because these are alternative ways which are built from autonomy and self-management, auto-management, and how they are being more effective. They have new ways of working, working with the relatives, with the neighbors, and with the members of their own communities. And most of the people we interviewed, those with H-2A visa, went because of the recommendation of a family member, of a member of their communities, and they have expressed they have have said that they have found safer conditions to using the H2A compared to what to the way they were working before. We had the experience of another person who was hired. That person found a vacancy ad in Facebook, and then the person attended a meeting, and it was a fraud. But we have also seen that those people who use this social media, and they have had a better results with respect to security in the hiring process. What do I mean by this? It is very, very important to focus on the wisdom that comes from self-organization and self-management of agricultural workers in Mexico. We can even find clues that would allow us to build formal mechanisms, contracting mechanisms, which are generally used by the big companies, both in Mexico as well as in the United States. I have more comments that I would like to make, but since I want to stick to the time, and it will be during the rest of the day when I will be sharing all this information with you, the rest of the information that I wanted to share. Here, would you please? Thanks. My name is Florencia Martinez, and I work at the Loyola Indigenous Development Center in León, Guanajuato, and there we work with children who work, and we're also part of the national network of male and female agricultural workers. Speaking about internal migration in Mexico, which is closely related to the forced domestic displacement, impoverishment, exploitation, taking others taking their lands, and this is the reason why whole families have to migrate. It is not possible to stay in their places of origin. Children in movement, they resist work, but they are being criminalized by the society. They are seen as an object. They are not seen as something or as someone who deserves to be treated as human beings, to recognize their words in order to produce policies and to do interstate efforts with Ministry of Labor, with the Ministry of Education, and work with the entities that will enforce the rights at this indigenous center to work with the children. We've been able to listen to life and work conditions produced by their industry and directly affecting their lives, and we can identify the practices and the narratives which are reproduced in Hawaii and how families are being affected. In the activities they do, they learn a lot and they see what they can do, how many kilograms do they cut, how many chiles you can fit in one specific sack. They know about harvesting, and this is something that is not recognized. We need to, we have the presence of other paradigms, and we have adult-centric approaches, and in this way they are not being taken into consideration in the countryside. There is work remunerated and non-remunerated work by girls, such as domestic work. So it is necessary in the narratives, in the construction of policies and of the programs. And speaking about the social responsibility, we need to work towards human rights, and to recognize people who are subject and that should enforce these rights. What is the responsibility of companies with respect to the impoverishing process? Which are the situations in the places of origin and in the place of destination? And we need to also ask where the food we eat comes from. What can we do? What is the access given to people?
Muchísimas gracias por la
Thank you very much. Thanks for your participation. Would you please?
Hola, buenos días.
Hello, good morning. My name is Oscar Bujarante. I come from Spain and the Embassy of Spain. I would like to thank for this um, and congratulate the presenters about all this. What I have concluded is that we need to go to the origin and we need to potentialize the social dialogue in the agricultural sector, where we have this responsibility and empathy. And in the social dialogue, we need to have entrepreneurs included, public administration, as well as all the workers, so that the dialogue spaces can be shared with the sovereignty of the labor rights and different problems have been presented. For example, speaking about recruitment, I believe it is necessary to simplify the official recruitment channels so that people know for sure where to go, and then from there they will be referred to other places where responsibilities are shared. We have also spoken about information and the education of working people, and it has also been said how, for example, workers do not have access to information. So there needs to be a commitment by entrepreneurs so that all workers can work at different points in time and can get training, and it should be mandatory training. And me as an inspector, and the role of the inspection in this sector is very, very important, not only from the sanctioning perspective, but also from the preventive perspective, and always informing and telling entrepreneurs which are the health conditions, and evidently there needs to be a sanctioning responsibility in case of standards not being complied with. I agree with what others have said. The will of entrepreneurs is very important to make sure these labor rights are enforced. And speaking about health services, when there is informal work, yes, we should also see the responsibility of the entrepreneurs in those cases because it should not be acceptable.
Muchas gracias. Adelante, por favor, ahí al lado.
Acá, perdón.
Ok, perfecto, sí, adelante.
Buenos días, yo soy Jaime
Good morning,
Hernández
I
de
am Jaime
nosotros,
Hernandez
nosotras,
from
nosotres. Quisiera plantear una
Nosotras,
pregunta respecto del tema del trabajo infantil.
Nosotras. I would like to ask a question about child
Anterior que tuvimos en el Colegio de
labor.
México,
In the previous
quedó
meeting we
claro
had in
a través
Colegio de
de un
Mexico,
comentario de una persona legisladora de
a
Argentina,
legislator, a federal
en el
legislator said that in the
imaginario
imaginary,
no solo social, sino
not only in the
político,
social but
el
also in the
trabajo
political
infantil,
imaginary,
particularmente en el sector
child
agrícola, se ve como
agricultural
una
work is
alternativa
seen as
a
an
la ausencia de
alternative
políticas públicas
in light of
para
the
la
lack
protección
of
de la
public
juventud.
policies.
Se dijo, por ejemplo,
It has
esta
also
persona
been said,
legisladora a la que estoy haciendo
this
referencia,
legislator
que ese trabajo
said that
infantil
this
y
labor work
adolescente era
and
una
this
alternativa
teenage
a que los jóvenes entraran a los grupos del crimen organizado.
labor was a way for
Pero, y esa es
what is the
la
relationship with
pregunta para
organized
toda la
crime?
mesa,
And this is
¿cómo podemos
precisely the
hacer
reason of
que
my
deje
question.
de
How
haber esa
can
idea?
we
Porque
stop
francamente es una idea
thinking about
absurda.
this idea?
Es
Because
decir,
this
el
is
gobierno,
nonsense. In
si
other
es
words, government,
negligente
if it is
respecto a las
negligent
condiciones
with
de trabajo
respect to
infantil, pues porque la única
living
alternativa
conditions of
a esa
child
otra
labor,
vida que
I
tienen
mean,
de
this is
pronto
the only
los
one
grupos
alternative.
criminales y eso implica, no sé qué opinan las
Because
integrantes de la
speaking
mesa,
about,
pues
they could also be
básicamente
part
la
of criminal
renuncia de
activities.
las instituciones públicas a atender a
So
niñas,
here
niños y
there is a
adolescentes
rejection,
y
and
preferir pues, que
teenagers
haya
and
esa
young people are
exhaustión
not
de
being treated
trabajo
correctly.
agrícola
They rather
porque
have
la
them working
única
and doing
vía
agricultural work.
para que, o al menos así se piensa,
And the
para que no
thought
entren a los grupos criminales.
is
Muchas
that they
gracias.
should not be in the criminal.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta.
There is a question related to them being able to join criminal gangs.
Gracias, yo quiero decir.
First, the International
Pues muchísimas
Labor
gracias por su
Organization.
pregunta.
Thanks for your
Es
question.
una cuestión
It is,
en la cual creo que todos podemos tener
I
una
believe we could
opinión
all
y
have
también
an
tener
opinion
esta reflexión profunda
and to have this deep
del trabajo
thought
adolescente
about
permitido, la
teen
juventud desde las niñas y los
labor
adolescentes en
allowed
el
and the
contexto del
youth of
trabajo infantil.
children.
Como lo
Speaking
hemos
about
dicho, el trabajo de agricultura
child
implica
labor in
actividades
agriculture, and as I
peligrosas.
have already said, it
Difícilmente
implies
habrá una
dangers
ocupación
and
en la
risks.
cual un
It
adolescente
is not
esté
easy to
libre
find a
de
teenager
peligro o que se encuentre en un
doing something
teléfono
where there is
tomando
no risk.
llamadas para que
Or
los productores lleguen, aunque no estoy diciendo que no puedan existir ese tipo de trabajos,
yes,
pero
it
difícilmente
could be
los
as
hay.
space as a
El
risk-free
origen del
space,
trabajo
but that is
infantil hay
not
que
very,
recordar
very
que es la
common.
pobreza, la
Remember that
falta
the
de
origin of
educación,
child labor
la
is
falta de
poverty, lack of
oportunidades.
education, lack of
Y
opportunities.
retomando el tema
And
de qué debemos de
retaking
hacer,
the
qué se
topic
debe
of
de hacer,
what
pues yo
are
veo
we
tres
expected
puntos
to do,
importantes y
I see
específicos.
three
Desde el
important
lado de
topics
la
and
autoridad
specific
del
topics.
Estado se tiene que
And
reforzar
on
el
the side
sistema
of the
educativo
authority,
y el
the
acceso a la
educational
educación.
system has to be reinforced and
Cuando
access to
hablamos del
education.
acceso a la
When we
educación,
speak about
encontramos un
access to
desafío
education,
sobre
we
todo
find
en
a
las zonas
challenge
rurales, ya que son
mainly in
pocas las
rural
escuelas
places
que
because
hay
only
y
a
si las
few
si
schools
existen,
are
es
available,
muy
and when
débil su
schools
infraestructura y su
exist,
sistema
they have a
educativo.
very
Entonces,
weak
un punto muy
infrastructure and
importante
educational
es
system. So
reforzar el
something very,
sistema
very
de la
important
educación y
is
su
to
infraestructura.
reinforce
Otro
infrastructure
punto
and
es
education.
también que se
Another
debe de
point is
fortalecer por
that
parte del sector privado el
something that
trabajo
has
digno
to be
para los
strengthened by
padres
the
de
private
familia.
sector.
Si en una familia
Jobs
hay un
with
trabajo
dignity
digno,
for parents. If there
eso
is one
ayuda
job
y reduce el
with
riesgo de que
dignity in a
exista
family,
trabajo
it will
infantil,
help and it will
específicamente
reduce
en la
child
agricultura. Y
labor,
también cuando una
specifically in
empresa
agriculture.
tiene la
When
responsabilidad social y
companies
está comprometida
have the
con
social responsibility
apoyar
and if
planes
they
de
are committed
restitución
to
de
support
derechos, puede impulsar estos
restitution
proyectos
plans of
educativos para
rights
que las
and
niñas y los
educational
adolescentes
programs can be
puedan estar
implemented
en
so
la
that
escuela en
teenagers
lugar
and
de estar
children
trabajando
can
en
go
la
to
calle.
school instead of working.
También desde el sector
And
sindical
the
se pueden
union
impulsar
sector, it
contratos
is possible
laborales
to
en
have
los
labor
cuales se
contracts
pongan cláusulas
where there
para
are clauses
prevenir el
in order to
trabajo
prevent
adolescente permitido en la agricultura
the
y también el
work of
trabajo
teenagers in
infantil que
agriculture
implica
as
las
well as the
peores
work
formas de
of
trabajo en la
children
agricultura.
because it implies the
Y también
worst.
por parte de la sociedad
And on
es
behalf of the
importante tener
society,
esta
it is
reflexión
very
que
important to
acaban de
have this
hacer.
reflection.
Es
What you
o no
just
es
said.
autorizado o está bien que
Is
las y los
it
adolescentes y los niños estén en
okay
la
if
agricultura.
children
Y
work in
evidentemente una
agriculture?
niña, un niño adolescente tiene que estar en la escuela, tiene que estar
Teenagers
viviendo
should
una
go to
niñez
school.
digna y libre de riesgos para que su vida pueda
They should be
mejor
risk
desarrollo y
free
sus
so
derechos
that
humanos
they
sean
can
garantizados.
develop correctly and
Eso
their
sería todo
human
por
rights
mi
be
parte.
enforced.
Bueno, primero, en la agricultura
In
ya sabemos
agriculture,
que no
we
se
know
permiten a
that
los menores de 18 años.
those people under 18
Eso
years of age
está
are
en
not
el
allowed.
artículo
This is in
175,
Article
176 de
175,
la Ley Federal del Trabajo.
176 of the Federal Labor
Está
Law.
también
And we also see this in
establecido
it is
actualmente en la última
established
reforma
in the
reciente del mes
last
de
reform
diciembre,
in the
del
month
13 de
of
diciembre, que se
December. On
votó
December
en la
13,
Cámara de
it was voted
Diputados y
at the Chamber of
Senadores,
Deputies.
pero luego de Diputados también la reforma de las personas
The
trabajadoras del
reform,
campo.
as well
Ahí está
as in
establecido
countryside
concretamente la
workers, this is where
prohibición
you
del trabajo
see
de menores de 18 años en la agricultura.
that those under
Eso
18 years of
primero.
age are not
En ese
allowed to work
sentido,
in
no
agriculture.
tiene
So this is the
nada
very
que
first
hacer ya
answer. So
la propuesta de la NOM
the
038
proposal of NUM
que
038
propuso, que
that
no
proposed
reúne, dicho sea de paso, los requisitos
and
de una norma oficial
it speaks
mexicana.
about the requirements of a Mexican
Que
official
propuso la
standard,
Secretaría
and
del
it was
Trabajo y
proposed
la
by the
mandó a la
Ministry of
CONAME y que está
Labor, and it
en
was then given
entonces,
to
partiendo
CONAMED,
de
and it
eso,
is in standby.
de que no se permite trabajo
So,
infantil
since it is not
allí
possible
y
to have
también
child
en relación al comentario que ahorita
work,
hace mi compañera,
and based on the comment she just
del
made,
convenio
and
182,
speaking about
el convenio
Agreement
182 donde se
182,
aprobó que la agricultura en México estaba realizada por los
Agriculture in Mexico was
en ese sentido,
taking the shape of the worst type of child labor.
que se haga
So it is not allowed to make it a type of education
formación, digamos, familiar, ¿no? En la
or
agricultura
family education.
que ahí es todavía,
Family,
digamos, mayor el reto, porque no solamente que no
here
trabajes
it is
en
not
el sector
only not
agrícola,
working in the
sino tampoco
agricultural
puedes
sector.
hacerlo como formativo, como actividad formativa, ni tampoco fuera de
It should not
dentro de la familia, ni
be
tampoco fuera de la familia.
something performed
Entonces,
in the family,
partiendo de
within the
eso,
family, or outside
y
of the family.
además,
And it is not
de
an
lo que
educational
también
tool.
comentaba de esa
And
deficiencia
based on these
en el sector
deficiencies
educativo, puede
in
ser
the
que sí
educational
exista
sector,
una escuela en
yes, there
las
might be a
comunidades,
school in
porque
communities.
nosotros hemos recorrido muchas comunidades en muchas regiones y demás.
We have
Lo que
visited
sucede
many
ahora es
communities.
que las escuelas, puede ser que haya una escuela en una comunidad rural, una secundaria o inclusive una preparatoria.
There can be junior high schools and
Los
high
papás
schools.
no tienen dinero suficiente. El trabajo en la agricultura es una
Work
actividad
in
temporal.
agriculture is a
Y
temporal
puede ser que a lo
activity.
mejor hay regiones donde ganen más, otras regiones donde
And there
ganen
are
menos.
regions
Al
where
final del
people
día,
make
yo creo
more
que ya está claro
or less.
que la carestía de la vida, el poder
But we know
adquisitivo se ha
that the purchasing
deteriorado
power
y es muy
is
difícil para alguien que
less
tiene un
and less, and
trabajo
it is
con otro
very
nivel de
difficult
ingreso, mucho
for
mayor
someone
para alguien que tiene un ingreso menor y que
with
además es temporal,
making more
¿no?
or less money
Entonces, ¿qué es lo
and
que pasa?
working in this with
Lo
this
que pasa en las
temporal
comunidades es de que esas escuelas
temporary activities. And what happens and
están
what we see in those
solicitando
schools
cuotas
is
de
that
inscripción,
sometimes those schools ask
¿sí?
for
Y si una
registration
familia
or
tiene 2 o 3
enrollment fees.
hijos y
And if
las
a
cuotas,
family
aparte de
has
las
2 or 3
cuotas de
children,
inscripción,
and
son las cuotas
apart
que
from
cada
this
mes están
enrollment
pidiendo,
fees, if this is
los
something
trabajos
they
que les
always
están
ask
solicitando.
for,
Hubo un evento muy
ask
interesante que
for.
organizó Save the
There was a
Children
very
en
interesting
Sinaloa,
event
donde
organized
colocó
by Save the
el
Children in
micrófono
Sinaloa,
en el
and the
escenario a
microphone
los jóvenes y ellos se manifestaban
was
ahí.
given to
Cuando recién
children,
hubo
and
la
they were
reforma en el
allowed to speak, and
2015,
it was very, and there was a
todo lo
recent
que tiene que ver con
reform, the one
crowdfunding.
of
Y de ahí un
2015.
muchacho nos hizo
And
llorar a todos
here
porque
and there
él
we were
narró,
crying because
venía de
one
una
guy,
comunidad
one
rural
person, he
y
was coming from
narró
a
todo lo
rural
que tenía
community,
que
and he said
pasar para poder
how much
estar en la
he had to
escuela.
spend
Y
in order to
luego
attend
vamos
the
a
school.
pensar que los papás
And
tienen
let's
trabajo, pero
pretend
ahorita si tú te
parents
vas a la
have a
zona
job,
rural
but now if
o
you go
a
to
todos
rural
los
places
lugares,
and
la
if you go
pandemia
to
dejó
many other
muchos niños
places,
huérfanos, muchos jóvenes
pandemic
huérfanos,
left many,
dejó
many
mucha gente
orphan
enferma,
children, lots of
imposibilitada para
people
trabajar.
who are now
Entonces,
sick. They
si esos
cannot work.
jóvenes que
And
antes
if
se
those
contrataban
children
en las
who
empresas
were
agrícolas,
able to
no,
work for
muchos no se
agricultural
contrataban
companies,
durante
many of them were not
durante
working.
toda la semana, lo hacían los fines de semana, trabajaban los fines de semana y sacaban el
All week
ingreso
long,
para
they were
poder
just working
solventar
during the
esos
weekends,
gastos.
and they were
Bueno,
somehow
en los recorridos
making
que
money.
nosotros hemos hecho en las
And based on
comunidades,
the
la hora de los maestros y también
visits to
un
the
poco con
different
el tema eso de
communities,
la poca
and now
tolerancia
speaking
a la
about
rebeldía de los
low
jóvenes y de
tolerance
que ya
to
se vulneran los
rebel
derechos y
young
etcétera.
people,
Entonces,
and now speaking about
expulsan a los jóvenes de la
infringement of
escuela. No quieren
rights,
batallar
now
con
children
los
are being
muchachos, no quieren
expelled and
batallar
taken
con
out of
lo que
the school. They
significa
don't want
educar
to
a un
fight
adolescente. Entonces, el
with the
adolescente
education of a
sale de ahí,
teenager.
oye,
So
te vas a las
teenagers will
comunidades
leave
y puede
those
ser que tú
schools,
lo
and
tomes
you
como
can
dices,
offer
pues es a
them
lo mejor es una justificación, pero
opportunities.
no, es una realidad.
But the
Los jóvenes
reality is
están
so different.
matando,
Young
están en las
people
nóminas del
are
crimen organizado
included
y
in the lists of
normalmente
the
les pagan
organized
lo que
crime,
les
and
pueden pagar
normally
en el
they
precio
make
accesible. Y puede ser que
what
algunos, porque
they
todavía
make
hay
in
jóvenes
other
en la
jobs. And
agricultura,
there are
y ustedes
some
lo
young
saben, hay
people in
jóvenes trabajando en la
agriculture, and you know
agricultura.
that there are young
Entonces
people
dices,
working
¿sabes
in
qué? Pues te
agriculture.
pago de la
Some
agricultura, les dan una
criminals will
motocicleta, un
offer
radio,
a radio, the
un
same
teléfono,
wage,
y entonces se
telephone,
ponen
and a
a hacer
motorcycle,
halcones o a
and
hacer
they
punteros
become
en
the
diferentes lugares.
snipers or
¿Y
the
tienes
ones
a
who
jóvenes
observe
matando por un
everything, and you will
salario
have
de
young people
150
killing,
pesos, de
making
200 pesos diarios?
150 pesos or
Entonces, esa es una
200
realidad en nuestro
pesos
país.
every day, and
¿Y
this is
qué
a
hace la
reality in our
autoridad?
country.
Y mira,
And what
ayer
the authority does,
aquí yo vengo de
I
Culiacán
come from
y
Culiacan,
ahí
and
una noche anterior.
A night before, I was not sleeping tightly because all night long drugs were cooked near my place. You cannot even sleep because of the smell of drugs. Don't you think the authority knows this is happening? Do you think the authority doesn't know children are working?
La autoridad no sabe que hay trata de personas, que hay trabajo forzoso. Lo saben.
Trafficking in persons, forced labor, they know it exists and they have the information. So here the thing is,
todos hacemos los que no nos damos cuenta, pues es una cosa, ¿no? Pero el joven ahorita, con las condiciones en que están, además,
young
en el sector
people
educativo, y luego deja tú
and
el
the
sector
educational
educativo, los
sector,
menores de edad,
and not
los
only
más
that,
chiquitos.
but also the youngest
Los más
and
chiquitos, ahorita si
the
tú
very
vas
little ones.
a los lugares
If
donde hubo
you go to
infraestructura
those
construida
places where there
por el
was an
programa de
infrastructure built by the program
agrícolas
and the
que antes
infrastructure of many
contrataban
agricultural
familias y
fields
ahora
that used
contratan
to
a
work
algunas
with
personas
families,
solas,
but not only
porque
people
no
alone work in those
quieren
places
absorber la totalidad
because
del
they do not
costo
want to
que
pay for
implica
the
una
total
guardería,
cost behind
alimentación,
a
todo lo que
daycare center
significa el
and
sistema de
food
protección a la infancia.
and
Entonces
the
deciden hacer
system
eso.
to
Pero las
protect
guarderías que
children.
están en las
This is why they
comunidades
are working
rurales
with only
están destruidas,
people alone. If you
desmanteladas.
go to the
El
daycare centers,
gobierno
you're going to see them
desapareció
destroyed.
las guarderías y se
Government
llevó a las personas
deleted
y desapareció de
daycare
paso el
centers and
programa de
it
jornaleros
also
agrícolas que
disappeared
sostenía
the
esas
program
guarderías.
of
Se las dejaron a
agricultural
los
workers, those
municipios.
paying for the
Y los
expenses of
municipios,
those
pues están
daycare
utilizando la
centers and
mayoría de los lugares
municipalities
para
are
todo,
using
menos para guarderías.
are the
Y
ones
entonces
using
encontramos que los
this
niños están
at
en los
least.
surcos, acompañando a sus
And
padres. Y
we've
si
seen how
acompañas al padre,
children
pues es muy
are
fácil delegar
working with
el trabajo.
walking
Hijo,
with
como quiera,
children,
agárrame la
and in
chuleta
those
mientras tú
situations,
me la sostienes, yo
children
voy colocando la
will
carga.
be asked to
Sí,
work, and they
entonces
get used to work
tienen
with their
muchas cosas, ¿no?
parents.
Y hace rato
So
que
there are
decía
many,
que
many things that
de
happen.
la
And as
debida
Hale
diligencia
said,
y
due
de los roles
diligence
que
and
cada
the
quien
roles
tiene que cumplir
that each person has
para que
to
esto cambie.
fulfill for
Si
this
no se
to
hace,
change.
si seguimos con puro
If we
discurso y
continue
con
only
puras
with the
excusas, no va a cambiar.
discourse and with
O
excuses,
agarra a
things will
cada quien
not
el rol que le
change.
corresponde y
And
entonces
people
esto
should
va
take
a
the rule
modificarse.
that
Si
corresponds, and
no,
this
nos
is
vamos
when
a
this is
seguir
going to
reuniendo
change.
miles
If
de veces y
not, we're
nosotros
going to
dando
keep
miles de cursos
gathering
que
thousands
dice
of
la
times.
gente, y yo por eso les puse,
And
la
as
voluntad y
people
la presión
say,
es
the will
fundamental
of
para que las
entrepreneurs is very
condiciones, para
important
que los
so
derechos de
that
los trabajadores
rights of
se
workers
respeten.
can be
Y eso
enforced and
significa que
respected,
el
and it would
empresario
mean that the
tiene que asumir
entrepreneurs
el costo que le
we
va a
need to
costar, el costo que va a
pay
significar
for the cost that it
este
will
poder cumplirlo.
mean
¿Qué significó
to comply
esto
with
para
it,
los
which was a
empresarios cuando
cost
se
for
modificó
entrepreneurs
la Ley Federal del
when the
Trabajo?
federal law
Primero en el
of
2012 elevó la edad
labor was
de 14 a
modified
16
first
años en
when
la
the age
agricultura.
went
Pues
from 14
significó
to
de que
16
muchas
years
familias se le
to
iban
be in
porque decían,
agriculture.
mi
Many
mamá no es
families were
aquí,
leaving
contratas a
because
mis
they
hijos en el
were
campo.
saying, "Do
Pues
you
si el empresario no quiere
contract
hacer
me and my
y
children?"
estaba
And
firme
then,
en
if it
su
was
decisión, pues la
entrepreneur
gente
with
se le
this
iba, pero
firm
eso tenía un
decision,
costo para
people
él,
were not
porque a él
leaving.
le costó la
But
papaya,
there was a
el
cost
ganado,
the
el
entrepreneur
ordenamiento, la
had
instalación,
to
etc.
pay for
Entonces,
their
sí
expenses.
es una
So it
situación
is a
realmente
situation, it
complicada y
is a
ya hay una
very
responsabilidad
complicated
del
situation,
empresario,
and
es
there is
cierto,
one
pero también
responsibility
hay
by the
una
entrepreneur, but
responsabilidad
there is
de
also
muchos
a
otros actores que no lo
responsibility
están
of many
haciendo
more
bien
players
y yo
who
felicito
are
de verdad,
not
yo
doing
sigo
it
a la
correctly.
red, al sindicato independiente de jornaleros agrícolas, porque ellos están haciendo un buen trabajo,
There is another
¿no?
union
Entonces
that is
creo
doing
que en la
very good
medida que los
job.
sindicatos
So
hagan su
as
trabajo,
long as
que las
unions
autoridades hagan su trabajo, que los
perform well,
intermediarios actúen como tienen que
if
actuar, de acuerdo, respetando la
intermediaries
ley, entonces
respect the law, and if we all do our work
y
as
es toda la
expected,
responsabilidad para
all
una
this is
parte
going to
y
be
es otra
much better.
responsabilidad
It
para
is
otra.
not all the
Todos
responsibility
somos
for one or the other.
corresponsables
We are
de
all
la trata de personas en
co-responsible
nuestro
for
país,
trafficking
del
in
trabajo
persons in our
forzoso en nuestro
country,
país, de la
forced
esclavitud, de la
labor,
explotación laboral
servitude, labor exploitation. We are all co-responsible for that. So the only thing that I would like to tell you is that the situation with organized crime is very tough and severe, and it is there. It is present in the lives of the Mexican countryside workers, agricultural workers. Now we're going to have a 15-minute break to do networking.
Continuar dialogando sobre este tema, específicamente sobre
We will
este
keep
diálogo.
speaking about this topic, and then we're going to be back at 11:35.
El diálogo 2. Gracias.
¿Cómo pagó Felipe? En Sinaloa. Sí, muy bien.